Grg Prg by Rudyard Kipling. Grg Prg, Puddington Pie, kissed the girls and made them cry. When the girls came out to play, Grg Prg ran away. If you will admit that a man has no right to enter his drawing room early in the morning when the housemaid is setting things right and clearing away the dust, you will concede that civilized people who eat out of china and own card cases have no right to apply their standard of right and wrong to an unsettled land. When the place is made fit for their reception by those men who are told off to the work, they can come up, bringing in their trunks, their own society and decalogue, and all the other apparatus. Where the Queen's law does not carry, it is irrational to expect an observance of other and weaker rules. The men who run ahead of the cars of decency and propriety and make jungle ways straight cannot be judged in the same manner as the stay-at-home folk of the ranks of the regular kitchen. Not many months ago, the Queen's law stopped a few miles north of Thiamengo on the Irrawaddy. There was no very strong public opinion up to that limit, but it existed to keep men in order. When the government said that the Queen's law must carry up to Boamo and the Chinese border, the order was given, and some men whose desire was to be ever a little advance of the true rush of respectability flocked forward with the troops. These were the men who could never pass examinations and would have been too pronounced in their ideas for administration of bureau-worked provinces. The supreme government stepped in as soon as might be with codes and regulations, and all but reduced New Burma to the dead Indian level, but there was a short time during which strong men were necessary and plowed a field for themselves. Among the forerunners of civilization was Grg Prg, reckoned by all who knew him a strong man. He held an appointment in Lower Burma when the order came to break the frontier, and his friends called him Grg Prg because of the singularly Burmese-like manner in which he sang a song whose first line is something like the words Grg Prg. Most men who have been in Burma will know the song. It means puff, 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 great steamboat. Grg Prg sang it to his banjo, and his friends shouted with delight, so that you could hear them far away in the teak forest. When he went to Upper Burma, he had no special regard for God or man, but he knew how to make himself respected and to carry out the mixed military-civil duties that fell to most men's share in those months. He did his office work and entertained, now and again, the detachment of fever-shaken soldiers who blundered through his part of the world in search of a flying party of Dacoits. Sometimes he turned out and dressed down the Dacoits of his own account, for the country was still smouldering would blaze when least expected. He enjoyed these chivalrous, but the Dacoits were not so amused. All the officials who came in contact with him departed with the idea that Grg Prg was a valuable person, well able to take care of himself, and, on that belief, he was left to his own devices. At the end of a few months he wearied of his solitude, and cast about for company and refinement. The Queen's law had hardly begun to be felt in the country, and public opinion, which is more powerful than the Queen's law, had yet to come. Also, there was a custom in the country which allowed a white man to take to himself a wife of the daughters of the Heth upon due payment. The marriage was not quite so binding as is the nikah ceremony among the Mohammedans, but the wife was very pleasant. When all our troops are back from Burma, there will be a proverb in their mouths, as thrifty as a Burmese wife, and pretty English ladies will wonder what in the world it means. The headman of the village next to Grg Prg's post had a fair daughter who had seen Grg Prg and loved him from afar. When news went abroad that the Englishman with a heavy hand who lived in the stockade was looking for a housekeeper, the headman came in and explained that for 500 rupees down he would entrust his daughter to Grg Prg's keeping, to be maintained in all honor, respect, and comfort, with pretty dresses according to the custom of the country. This thing was done, and Grg Prg never repented it. He found his rough-and-tumble house put straight and made comfortable, his hitherto unchecked expenses cut down by 1/2, and himself petted and made out of much by his new acquisition, who sat at the head of his table and sang songs to him and ordered his Madras services about, and was in every way as sweet and merry and honest and winning a little woman as the most exacting of bachelors could have desired. No race, men say who know, produces such good wives and heads of households as the Burmese. When the next detachment tramped by on the war-path, the subaltern in command found Georgy Porgy's table a hostess to be deferential to, a woman to be treated in every way as one occupying an assured position. When he gathered his men together next dawn and were plunged into the jungle, he thought regretfully of the nice little dinner and the pretty face, and envied Georgy Porgy from the bottom of his heart. Yet he was engaged to a girl at home, and that is how some men are constructed. The Burmese girl's name was not a pretty one, but as she was promptly christened Georgina by Georgy Porgy, the blemish did not matter. Georgy Porgy thought well of the petting and the general comfort, and vowed that he never spent 500 rupees to a better end. After 3 months of domestic life, a great idea struck him. Matrimony, English matrimony, could not be such a bad thing after all. If he were so thoroughly comfortable at the back end of beyond with this Burmese girl who smoked cheroots, how much more comfortable would he be with a sweet English maiden who would not smoke cheroots and play upon the piano instead of a banjo? Also, he had a desire to return to his kind, to hear a band once more, and feel how it felt to wear a dress suit again. Decidedly, matrimony would be a very good thing. He thought the matter out at length of evenings, and while Georgina sang to him, or asked him why he was so silent, and whether she had done anything to offend him. As he thought, he smoked, and as he smoked, he looked at Georgina, and in his fancy turned her into a fair, thrifty, amusing, merry little English girl, with hair coming low down on her forehead, and perhaps a cigarette between her lips. Certainly not a big, thick Burmese cheroot of the brand that Georgina smoked. He would wed a girl with Georgina's eyes and most of her ways, but not all. She could be improved upon. Then he blew thick smoke wreaths through his nostrils and stretched himself. He would taste marriage. Georgina had helped him to save money, and there were 6 months' leave due to him. "See here, little woman," he said, "we must put by more money for these next 3 months. I want it." That was a direct slur on Georgina's housekeeping, for she prided herself on her thrift, but since her god wanted money, she would do her best. "You want money?" she said with a little laugh. "I have money. Look." She ran to her own room and fetched out a small bag of rupees. "Of all that you have given me, I keep back some. See, 107 rupees. You can want more money than that. Can you want more money than that? Take it. It is my pleasure if you use it." She spread out the money on the table and pushed it towards him with her quick, little, pale yellow fingers. Georgy Porgy never referred to economy in the household again. 3 months later, after the dispatch and a receipt of several mysterious letters which Georgina could not understand, and hated for that reason, Georgy Porgy said that he was going away, and she must return to her father's house and stay there. Georgina wept. She would go with her god from the world's end. Why should she leave him? She loved him. "I am only going to Rangoon," said Georgy Porgy. "I shall be back in a month, but it is safer to stay with your father. I will leave you 200 rupees. "If you go for a month, what need of 200 rupees? 50 are more than enough. There is some evil here. Do not go, or at least let me go with you." Georgy Porgy does not like to remember that scene even at this date. In the end, he got rid of Georgina by a compromise of 75 rupees. She would not take more. Then he went by steamer and rail to Rangoon. The mysterious letters had granted him 6 months' leave. The actual flight and idea might have been treacherously hurt severely at that time, but as soon as the big steamer was well out into the blue, things were easier, and Georgina's face, and the queer little stockaded house, and the memory of the rushes of shouting dacoits by night, the cry and struggle of the first man that he had ever killed with his own hand, and 100 other more intimate things, faded and faded out of Georgy Porgy's heart, and the vision of approaching England took its place. The steamer was full of men on leave, all rampantly jovial souls, who had shaken off the dust and sweat of Upper Burma, and were as merry as schoolboys. They helped Georgy Porgy to forget. Then came England with its luxuries and decencies and comforts, and Georgie Porgy walked in a pleasant dream upon pavement of which he had nearly forgotten the ring, wondering why men in their senses ever left town. He accepted his keen delight in his furlough as the reward of his services. Providence further arranged for him another and greater delight, all the pleasures of a quiet English wooing, quite different from the brazen business of the East, when half the community stand back and bet on the result, and the other half wonder what Mrs. So-and-so will say to it. It was a pleasant it was a pleasant girl, and a perfect summer, and a big country house near Petsworth, where there are acres and acres of purple heather and high-grassed water meadows to wander through. Georgie Porgy felt that he had at last found something worth living for, and naturally assumed that the next thing to do was to ask the girl to share his life in India. She, in her ignorance, was willing to go. On this occasion there was no bartering with a village headman. There was a fine middle-class wedding in the country, with a stout papa and a weeping mamma, and a best man in purple, and fine linen, and 6 snub-nosed girls from Sunday school to throw roses on the path between the tombstones up to the church door. The local paper described the affair at great length, even down to giving the hymns in full, but that was because the directions were starving for want of material. Then came a honeymoon at Arundel, and the mamma wept copiously before she allowed her one daughter to sail away to India under the care of Georgie Porgy, the bridegroom. Beyond any question, Georgie Porgy was immensely fond of his wife, and she was devoted to him as the best and greatest man in the world. When he reported himself at Bombay, he felt justified in demanding a good station for his wife's sake, and because he had made a little mark in Burma and was beginning to be appreciated, they allowed him nearly all that he asked for, and posted him to a station which we will call Sutrain. It stood up upon several hills, and was styled officially a sanitarium, for the reason that the drainage was utterly neglected. Here Georgie Porgy settled down, and found married life came very naturally to him. He did not rave, as do many bridegrooms, over the strangeness and delight of seeing his own true love sitting down to a breakfast with him every morning, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. He had been there before, as the Americans said, and, checking the merits of his own presence, graced by those of Georgina, he was more and more inclined to think that he had done well. But there was no peace or comfort across the Bay of Bengal, under the teak trees where Georgina lived with her father, waiting for Georgie Porgy to return. The headman was old, and remembered the war of '51. He had been to Rangoon, and knew something of the ways of the Kulas. Sitting in the front of his door in the evening, he taught Georgina a dry philosophy, which did not console her in the least. The trouble was that she loved Georgie Porgy just as much as the French girl in the English history books loved the priest whose head was broken by the king's bullies. One day she disappeared from the village with all the rupees that Georgie Porgy had given her, and a very small smattering of English, also gained from Georgie Porgy. The headman was angry at first, but lit a fresh cheroot, and said something uncomplimentary about the sex in general. Georgina had started on a search for Georgie Porgy, who might be in Rangoon, or across the Black Water, or dead for aught that she knew. Chance favored her. An old Sikh policeman told her that Georgie Porgy had crossed the Black Water. She took a steerage passage from Rangoon and went to Calcutta, keeping the secret of her search to herself. In India every trace of her was lost for 6 weeks, and no one knows what trouble of heart she must have undergone. She reappeared 400 miles north of Calcutta, steadily heading northward, very worn and haggard, but very fixed in her determination to find Georgie Porgy. She could not understand the language of the people, but India is infinitely charitable, and the women folk along the Grand Trunk gave her food. Something made her believe that Georgie Porgy was to be found at the end of the pitiless road. She may have been a sepoy who knew him in Burma, but of this no one can be certain. At last she found a regiment on the line of march, and met there one of the many subalterns whom Georgie Porgy had invited to dinner in the far-off, old days of the dacoity hunting. There was a certain amount of amusement among the tents when Georgie threw herself at the man's feet and began to cry. There was no amusement when her story was told, but a collection was made, and that was more to the point. One of the subalterns knew of Georgie Porgy's whereabouts, but not of his marriage. So he told Georgina, and she went her way joyfully to the north. in a railway carriage where there was rest for tired feet and shade for a dusty little head. The marches from the train through the hills into Soutrain were trying, but Georgina had money, and families journeying in bullock carts gave her help. It was almost it was an almost miraculous journey, and Georgina felt sure that good spirits of Burma were looking after her. The hill road to Soutrain is a chilly stretch, and Georgina caught a bad cold. Still, there was Georgy Porgy at the end of all the trouble to take her up in his arms and pet her as he used to do in the old days, when the stockade was shut for the night, and he approved of the evening meal. Georgina went forward as fast as she could, and her good spirits did her one last favor. An Englishman stopped her in the twilight just at the turn of the road into Soutrain, saying, "Good heavens, what are you doing here?" He was Gills, the man who had been Georgy Porgy's assistant in Upper Burma, and who occupied the next post to Georgy Porgy's in the jungle. Georgy Porgy had applied to have him work with at Soutrain because he liked him. "I've come," said Georgina simply. "It was such a long way, and I have been months in coming. Where is his house?" Gillis gasped. He had seen enough of Georgina in the old times to know that explanations would be useless. You cannot explain things to the Oriental. You must show. "I'll take you there," said Gillis, and he led Georgina off the road, up the cliff, by a little pathway, to the back of the house set on a platform cut into the hillside. The lamps were just lit, but the curtains were not drawn. "Now look," said Gillis, stopping in front of the drawing-room window. Georgina looked and saw Georgy Porgy and the bride. She put her hands up to her hair, which had come out of its topknot and was straggling about her face. She tried to set her ragged dress in order, but the dress was past pulling straight, and she coughed a queer little cough, for she really had taken a very bad cold. Gillis looked, too, but while Georgina only looked at the bride once, turning her eyes always on Georgy Porgy, Gillis looked at the bride all the time. "What are you going to do?" said Gillis, who held Georgina by the wrist, in case of any unexpected rush into the lamplight. "Will you go in and tell that Englishwoman that you lived with her husband?" "No," said Georgina faintly. "Let me go. I'm going away. I swear that I am going away." She twisted herself free and ran off into the dark. "Poor little beast," said Gillis, dropping into the main road. "I'd have given her something to get back to Burma with. What a narrow shave, though, and that angel would never have forgiven it." This seemed to prove that the devotion of Gillis was not entirely due to his affection for Georgy Porgy. The bride and the bridegroom came out into the veranda after dinner, in order that the smoke of Georgy Porgy's cheroots might not hang in the new drawing-room curtains. "What is that noise down there?" said the bride. Both listened. "Oh," said Georgy Porgy, "I suppose some brute of a hillsman has been beating his wife." "Beating his wife? How ghastly!" said the bride. "Fancy your beating me!" She slipped an arm round her husband's waist, and, leaning her head against his shoulder, looked out across the cloud-filled valley in deep content and security. But it was Georgina crying, all by herself, down the hillside, among the stones of the watercourse, where the washermen wash the clothes. That is Georgy Porgy by Rudyard Kipling.